Let me start as follows. So from where I sit and the experience I've had, there is no question in my mind that the country is in need of constitutional reform. There is no question in my mind that the current two-party system is not yielding the benefits that we all, effectively two-party system, even though we have provision for other smaller parties, is not yielding the benefits that we all hoped for back in 1992 when the Constitution was first put together. And why do I say that? In some respects, we've heard a lot of the reasons why. I thought Kwesi Prempeh's presentation in particular was very broad in helping us understand. But clearly, my perspective is that there's too much power vested in the executive. And that goes all the way down to the district. We talked about district elections. The president has the power to appoint many of the senior members of the legislature, has the power to appoint boards of state-owned enterprises. And this system we have effectively where it's a winner-take-all pretty much means that we have a 4 to 8 year cycle of political management. What I also believe and what I see is that our political managers are the same as our economic managers. We have a situation where our private sector is not particularly big. Most small businesses will tell you how difficult it is to access credit in this country. Interest rates are very high. So we, over the years, have not built up the kind of private sector that we need to basically power the economy forward. And we have a government with all these state-owned enterprises that runs a lot of our key areas. A lot of these organizations tend to be bloated. They're not particularly efficient, and they're not generating the kind of outcomes that we need to see for the benefit of the country. This is certainly my view. And all of that for me goes back to the kind of institutional and constitutional framework that we have basically had in place for the last 30 years. So the gist of it for me is that we are caught in these 4 to 8 year political cycles, which we're all very familiar with. What really aggravates the situation for many of us who work in the economy is that our political managers are effectively the same as our economic managers. We have a small private sector, and whether you look at the petroleum industry, the electricity industry, the insurance industry, many of these companies are dominated by state-owned institutions that are also appointed by our political managers. So effectively what we have is also a very short-term economic management view. And that is why the road from Accra to Cape Coast is the same road we've had for the last 40 years. That is why the road to Kumasi is the same road we've had for the last 40 years. We cannot, it seems it's very difficult for us to think long-term and to execute long-term. A few years back, we tried through the National Development Planning Commission to put together a 40-year plan. It didn't go anywhere for various reasons. And, when our parties come into power and they give lip service to this idea of a long-term plan, it is quickly abandoned for the various short-term parochial interests that we tend to have. So let me just take 2 examples in spaces that I'm familiar with, just to make the point. Let's talk about energy for a minute, electricity. So, lately, many people have been complaining that there's doomsday, even though there's really not doomsday. There's a lot of problems in the transmission and distribution space. And then, of course, the SOEs have presented tariff increases of over 100% in certain cases. What I found particularly interesting this week, was a headline in the Business and Financial Times where the head of the IPP industry was saying the industry or the IPPs were owed close to $1 billion in arrears of unmade payments. So you ask yourself, so from a certain point of view, things are okay. Ghana has an installed capacity of over 5,000 megawatts. If you look through the reports, actually only about 4,000 are available. And already we are using somewhere between 150 to 200 megawatts a year in terms of new or using up that capacity we have. What does that mean? It means that in 3 to 4 years' time, we will be over 4,000 megawatts. And if we don't sign new capacity, we will really get the doomsday that we all are so worried about. Now, what are the plans that this government is making to avert that? If we have the IPPs, the private sector saying that I am owed $900 million, as was reported this week, what investor is going to come in and invest in the company, in the country, invest $500, $600, $700 million when he has no assurance that he will get his money back, has no assurance that those arrears will be paid? How does that relate to a need for a much longer term planning for the things that we do? The fact of the matter is, many of these issues, the reasons for these arrears are longstanding. They didn't just happen yesterday. If I were to look through the reports of the Electricity Company of Ghana, for instance, or NEDCO under VRA, you will see that their losses, what we call their technical and commercial losses, are over 20%. When you add the collection issues they face, they're over 30%. Now, guess what? 15 years ago, it was exactly the same. So you have to ask yourself, what progress have we made in those last 15 years to actually bring those losses down, to make the sector efficient? And why is it that these institutions come back to the public and basically say, you've got to give me 100% increase? You're effectively paying for my inefficiencies. And the point really here is lacking that long-term view of how we properly address some of these issues means we're always focusing on the 4 to 8 year cycle. And it is not allowing us to really address the long-term issues that are still with us 10, 15, 20, 40 years on. Economic management of the state is short-term in line with the political management. And that is why, in my view, we are in dire need of that constitutional reform to really think through why we give so much power to the ruling party. Let's talk about the economy for a minute. I think many of us will acknowledge that these are challenging times.
Extremely.
Interest rate as of March, 24%. Inflation as of March, 24%, 23.6 to be exact. We had the monetary policy rate go up 17%. It may go up some more very shortly. And when I look back in time, in history, the last time we had those kinds of inflation rates was almost 20 years ago. So now we know that there are reasons for this. We know that the COVID was a big shock to us. We know that the Ukraine-Russian war is a big shock to supply chains. The real question is, are we as a country, how are we managing those shocks? It's not so much whether the shock has occurred, it's how are we managing? Do we have the resilience? Do we have the coherence? Do we have the governance capacity to manage those shocks in a way that some other countries are managing better than we are? And again, for me, it comes back to what are those long-term fundamental frameworks we have in place to build that governance capacity, to build that internal coherence, to build that greater resilience, so that inflation isn't 24%. When you read the media and you hear that UK is at a 40-year high, inflation is 9%, and the sky is falling, what does the man and woman on the street do when inflation is 24%, interest rates are over 20%? How does that person manage their business? Now, you may think that it doesn't connect back to the Constitution. It doesn't connect back to the need for accountability of our political managers. It doesn't account for the sort of the asymmetric power that our leaders have, but it does. Because if we're not able to challenge, question, put in place long-term solutions to our problems, if every 4 to 8 years they change, we will be going in cycles. And that is my submission. We need constitutional reform to effectively rebalance the power that is currently inherent in the two-party system.